What's up, everybody? Welcome back to part 2 of my trek through volume 2 of Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation. Yes, this is still volume 1. I just like holding on to a book when I talk about books. Don't judge me. Before I get into chapter 3 of volume 2, I do want to say that I unfortunately forgot two really cool things in my previous segment. The first thing is that I noted that I don't remember them talking about the fact that beast folk, being technically a part of the demon race, are supposed to be discriminated against. We kind of mentioned later on about the idea that, well, when we get into the whole past of the world itself, it does mention the idea that there is a little bit of a discrimination, even though there is peace. And obviously, Rudeus finds it a little odd that this household has a lot of beast folk in it, obviously because Sauros and Philip have a certain thing for beast folk. It is interesting to note that there is that little discrimination, despite the fact that they're full. This household's full of them. Additionally, the other cool thing that I hate that I forgot about this, I really loved in the novel how they handled Eris and Rudeus arriving back home after being kidnapped. In the anime, it was sort of like Eris comes up there and then she turns around and Rudeus is walking away and she says, "Where are you going? You're going to be my tutor, basically." And in the novel, it's more. It gives a little more credit to Eris, as she is obviously extremely tired. I mentioned the idea that in the novel, they were going over 2 days span just to get home because they were 2 villages away, and they stayed in an inn. But again, Eris never slept. She was constantly looking at the door every time a noise happened. So obviously she's extremely exhausted. So when they finally arrive, and Eris starts walking towards the manor, she collapses. And the maids quickly rush up to help her, to support her and get her back on her feet, but she shoos them away. And here's the key thing. I like that note, that she shooed them away. She wanted to stand on her own. She turns to Rudy and says, "I will give you the honor and the privilege of calling me Eris." And that was his acceptance. And then she collapses. Like, she literally just collapses. And like I said, I really like that. I think it was a really cute thing that she, again, she's from a normal family. She should have just allowed them to pick her up. Yeah, that's their job. Pick me up. No, she was standing on her own 2 feet to declare that Rudy can have this honor. I thought it was really cute. Like I said, I thought it was very significant, so I didn't want to forget it. But yeah, moving on to chapter 3, nothing really to note early on in here. We just kind of note some ideas of previous tutors of Eris, one being punched by her, one that tried to be forceful but then failed miserably. I kind of wonder if any of those were Roxy. Technically, she lost the interview, so I don't think that she ever got to meet Eris, but maybe they'll talk about that later. But it does note the idea that the only reason Ghislain became her tutor is because she can't overcome her. Like, if you note the idea that when Rudy first met Eris, he tried to be forceful and he got the crap beat out of him. Ghislain's not going to have too much of a trouble getting Eris to essentially chill out. And yes, that would in fact cause Eris to want to learn under her to become as strong as Ghislain. But this is cool because we start in chapter 3 to get into Ghislain. Technically, Paul's party in general. We kind of got notes of this in the anime, the idea, and they had little silhouettes of each of the characters. But this got pretty significantly deep into this whole idea. Mainly from the perspective of Ghislain. Because in this certain point, we're trying to get Ghislain to help Eris understand that this is important. So this just jumps into Ghislain. It notes the idea that her master accepted her despite her entire village kicking her out. It mentions that she gets into a party and that party disbands, which is obviously Paul's party. But despite the fact that Ghislain wanted to continue to be an adventurer, unfortunately, nobody really treated her decently well like Paul's party, so she was constantly being swindled and everything, and she eventually led to the point where she was going to starve. And that was thankfully when the Boreas family took her in. But specifically Paul's party, what they mentioned that was a balanced party of 6 people. They mentioned an unknown warrior that was a tank, Paul that was a swordsman that was a secondary tank and DPS, Ghislain, which was a swordsman DPS, an unknown person that was a magician DPS, and then obviously Zenith, who was a priest healer. And of course, a thief. They kind of mentioned that a thief is not really what we normally call a thief that just steals things. They kind of describe it as a general term of somebody that does a ton of different odd jobs. Picking locks, spotting traps, constructing tents, making deals with merchants, all those kind of things. It's somebody that is kind of required to be sharp and agile, and that they kind of mostly come from merchant families. I like that Rudeus is like, so it's somebody that's kind of like a treasure hunter, and he's like, no, it's somebody that would like steal money from you in the middle of the night and then gamble it away, which she knows that the guy that was gambling stuff in their party always usually came back with more money, but sometimes he would get deals and stuff that would just end up being just watered down content. And you would think that this would be something that you would not like and that he would be kind of banished from the party, but Ghislain noting the idea that, hey, we had Paul in the party and he was a womanizer, so if we dealt with them, we're going to deal with this thief. We did get into a little bit of different titles like knights, which are meant to be pretty much people that are warriors that are appointed to be knights by kings and liege lords. They're typically educated, they know arithmetic. Some can use spells, but she kind of notes they're typically just people that are nobles and just full of pride. Rudeus does kind of bring up, well, what about magic knights? There's got to be magic knights in this world. But she's like, yes, there's some knights that use offensive spells, but she's like, you could pretty much just call whatever you want. I mean, if you want to title yourself that, then whatever. It kind of gives a little bit, and this could just be from Ghislain's perspective, but it kind of gives a little bit of this idea of sometimes titles, unless you're looking at more prestigious titles, probably aren't worth a damn. Yes, being called a divine sword god is probably very important, but things like that just don't really matter. But yeah, that would eventually got into what we found out from the anime is that she was so poor at some point that she decided to eat demon feces, and that made her really sick, and she almost died kind of thing. And that's why learning division's important, and so yeah, Eris gets all into learning things finally. After this, they do mention the idea that Rudeus is getting better at swords, and opposed to what he was learning from Paul, who's just completely built on instinct. He's actually learning something here, and that's really kind of in favor due to essentially Ghislain knowing the basics and how things work so she can explain how it works. Paul was just kind of instinctively, so he doesn't know how it works. And additionally, being that he is training alongside Eris, he has a training partner, somebody to rival against, and the two of them to be able to work against each other. One getting better than the other, and the other one wanting to get better than that person. So they have a little competition going on. But again, technically not just having your face thrown on the ground, you have somebody that you can sort of compete against. Ghislain does technically acknowledge that she was like Paul once, that she was instinct-based, but eventually she did learn that she had to start using her head and thinking logically, and that's how she became king tier. Very quickly after this, we talk about essentially the book that Rudy is using, that he has distributed two of these books to both Ghislain and Eris. This is a book that apparently was distributed back 500 years ago, kind of was massively printed and got way out there, and so a lot of basically magic using just kind of boomed at that point. And he kind of notes like, how did this happen? And then he notes that it actually says in their Renoa University of Magic, so it's like literally an advertisement ploy. Moving into chapter 4, we get our little trip into Roa. He somehow manages to talk this etiquette lady Edna into having a day off, and even though he wants to get the day off, course, Eris and Ghislain tag along. Nothing about the trip in was significantly different. He does kind of note how these walls get so big. Maybe they will use magic and then combine with actual construction to get them done. At some point, he notes the floating city, which of course is the armored dragon king Pedagoog's floating fortress, learning at this point that it's actual fact and not just fairy tale. Later on, Rudy does look into Pedagoog and really dives into the history of this hero. He knows that nobody knows where he was born or raised, which is kind of curious. The earliest record they have before he was famous was that he was dragged to an adventurer guild by the dragon god Urupin. He showed his strength in no time. The demon god Urupin, North god Kalman, and the twin emperors Migas and Gumis formed a party with him. They crushed pretty much every single opponent that they faced. And thanks to the brotherly bond that he had with Urupin, he was written into history as the armored dragon and one of the 5 dragon commanders of the dragon god. Following this, they get into kind of what made him famous, or at least where his strength was. Getting into his actual battle with Laplace, it mentions the idea that he used summons in battle against Laplace to bring forth 12 familiars: Void, Dark, Bright, Surge, Life, Violent Earthquake, Time, Roaring Thunder, Destruction, Insight, Insanity, and Atonement. With them, he restored the old floating fortress of Chaosbreaker, which is the big, huge floating temple that he's on, or castle, and he headed into battle against Laplace. Still obviously unable to defeat him, he decides instead to seal him away. But because of his achievements, they named this era after him. But the surprising thing to Rudeus, and obviously probably to most people, is that he chose not to reign over or rule over anything after doing this. I mean, he's so super famous, he saved the world from Laplace. But he didn't choose to take anything. But instead, he just chose to stay in his old fortress, hovering above the world. And after 400 years later, is he still even alive up there? Is the big question mark that Rudeus has. Moving on to chapter 5, we get the birthday segment. Eris' birthday, which I thought there was a segment of this that was especially curious, that it was, in my opinion, done better in the anime. I'll be perfectly honest. I know it's going to get some people angry at me, but I'll explain as we get there. Before we get into that stuff, we get a little bit of update on their progression. Eris has made it to intermediate swordsman, while Rudeus is still kind of not progressing well. Eris has mastered every school of magic, but Ghislain is only able to use fire. He also notes that he is trying to teach them silent casting, but that's not really progressing very well. He does note once again, that it seems like Sylphie was just really good at magic. This is where we pretty much get the whole segment about the etiquette class. The fact that Eris has to learn to dance for her big 10th birthday. What's kind of different in the novel is that he's immediately confronted by Edna, who's, of course, teaching Eris etiquette, and obviously how to dance. At this point, she pretty much ropes Rudeus into helping her teach Eris. What's odd, though, is that it immediately gets into Rudy's plan to help Eris dance better. Kind of in the anime, they just kind of practice a little bit. He goes, okay, everything's gonna be fine, right? And the etiquette teacher's kind of like, yeah, I guess so. But no, at this point, he's starting to have this kind of lesson given to Eris where she needs to close her eyes, practice feints, dodging feints while she's keeping her eyes closed, and that he's going to use a little magic on her to help her improve. So it's a little different than in the anime, where the anime kind of had all that happening on the ballroom floor. As everybody's watching, he enacts this plan. But it was funny to note that Rudy did so well, he was being praised by Edna, and Eris was getting really mad. Like, he's picked up on this so easily. I mean, that was kind of something that she expressed to him when he first went to get Eris to bring her back to the lessons, was that you're just good at everything. He's like, no, there's things that I'm not good at. But what's great is that if you keep pushing, eventually, when you do succeed at it, it feels so much better. It was funny that eventually Edna asks Rudy, like, where'd you learn this? Like, what is this? And he's like, well, swordsmanship and dancing is kind of similar. And she's like, what? Wait? He kind of drops the name of sword dancers, and she's like, I've never heard of that. And he's like, oh, I think it was from like some demon continent or something like that. There's people that do sword dancing. I think that's where I learned it from. So yeah, that's when they get into the actual birthday, the 10th birthday for Eris. They kind of have them all lined up. You can kind of notice the fact that Eris is sitting there like a robot, just parroting, pretty much tell my father if anybody asks her anything political, noting the idea that she really doesn't know anything about politics. But yes, that's the point in which Eris goes out to dance. And again, differently than the anime, Rudeus, as planned, was the first person to dance with her. And again, he enacts this plan to have her do these feints and stuff as they dance to calm her nerves. And this is something that obviously the Edna notices that kind of breaks that nervousness. But either way, like I said earlier, I think this is where, again, I almost feel like the anime did it better. I just like the idea that it was less planned. I guess it gives more credit to Rudeus that he pre-planned this and that he was calculative to this whole situation, and that he didn't just go into this birthday party and just allow her to fail with the first dance with a random stranger. But either way, I felt like the anime was a lot more impactful. This idea that she's out there, Sauros is yelling at her saying, get up, what are you doing? You're gonna make a mockery of the Boris family. Everything's weighing down upon her. And then he steps forward and helps her and shows her a technique that can get her through the situation. Again, I kind of felt like the anime just, it was so much more impactful, so much more emotional. And I didn't really get that feeling with this in the novel. And it was kind of funny. There's another weird difference. In the anime, because he did this to save Eris, he got the attention of all these girls. And they all came to him and were like, oh, who are you? What's your name? And all this kind of stuff. Can we dance? In the novel, Sauros is telling everybody that he's a part of the Grey Rat family. That's why they're confronting him. It wasn't because they were awe and swooned by his... They were, and that's why they asked Sauros about it. But it's noting the idea that Sauros being drunk and just kind of filled with pride of Rudy, he kind of just takes him and says, yeah, he's obviously from the Grey Rat family. And so that's why everybody swarmed him. And he had to dance with like a whole bunch of different girls, and eventually got to the point where he kind of had to turn down these younger kids and these older people just because he's like, height's gonna cause a problem. It was really oddly different. At some point during this party, he does note that Ghislain over in the corner is drooling, looking at the food, and she can't do anything, so he decides to send a bunch of food back to his place, and that's why he eventually ends up back in his room with both Ghislain and Eris. Eris kind of just follows along because that's where he's going with Ghislain. But this does give him the opportunity to give both of them his gift. He made a wand for each one of them, and similar in the anime, she wants a figure, but then she eventually accepts the wand because that's what Ghislain's doing. But interestingly enough, when it comes to Ghislain giving the gift to Eris, the ring, in the anime, it's just kind of like, oh, it looks like she's looking to you for a gift. And Ghislain's like, oh, well, here's a ring. And it wards off wolves. And then they get into the whole joke about Paul. In the novel, it's more pointing out that Ghislain doesn't have anything. She's like, literally, I don't have anything to give. I don't have any possessions. And so Rudy kind of whispers to her, you know, if you have anything on your person, like anything, she will accept it. Like, she looks up to you that much. You're like her big sister that she loves so much. You could give her a strand of hair and she'd probably like, he didn't say that, but my mindset went to, yeah, you could probably give her a strand of hair and she would be super excited. But no, this leads to her finally realizing, oh, I have a ring on my hand. She can have this. And it's a wooden ring, which kind of looked like it was gold in the anime. But either way, this is obviously something that Eris really enjoys. He knows the idea that I think she likes that more than my wand. And the last segment that we have in the 5th chapter to wrap things up is the meeting with Sauros at the top of the tower. It notes the idea that he's been told to never go to this tower. But on this one day, he's just kind of walking out there after the whole party. Everybody's still sleeping and still kind of getting over everything. He decides to wander off into that tower. And of course, again, when he goes up there, he hears the moaning from the cat girl maid, and he kind of peeks around the corner. You know, there's differences in the novel than the anime, and I almost don't really want to mention them, but I have to. It notes the idea that the maid immediately notices him, Rudy, and looks like she's actually excited. Like, she likes the idea that she's being watched. Again, it was one of those things in the anime. She immediately sees Rudeus after the deed's done and then runs out in a panic. Like, no, she was liking the fact that Rudy was watching, or at least somebody was spectating is what they're kind of insinuating there. But this was really interesting. I did find this scene a lot different than the anime. And I think that was probably because of the fact that this was sort of at the end of an episode. So in the anime, Sauros is like, come on in. He's like, I'm sorry I interrupted you. And he's like, don't worry about it. And he kind of mentions the idea of, man, he seems a little bit calmer. But this is the point where Sauros points out the object in the sky. And he says, this thing's here. Rudy's like, is that something that's bad? And he's like, no, I don't think it's bad. And he's like, why would you say that? Well, it wouldn't do any good. If you thought it was a bad thing, it's just going to cause you undue stress, basically. And it immediately cuts to Rudy praying to the thing. It was very short and simple, just acknowledging the idea that Sauros is up here and he knows this object's here. But the novel's quite different, and it insinuates quite a bit that I think is kind of significant. It kind of has Rudy acknowledge the idea that, yes, he's calmer, but he knows why he's calmer because he just got done with the deed. But Sauros also mentions the idea that the reason why he's there is that he's praying to the object. And Rudy's like, it's a really weird way of praying, dude. But Sauros mentions the idea that he had noticed this object 3 years ago, and that it's not bad. So again, this is kind of significant to know that Sauros has known this object has been here for 3 flippin' years. This isn't something that just popped up. He's known it's been there for a long time. But again, he acknowledges the idea that thinking of it as a bad thing is just going to cause you undue stress. But here's the thing that kind of is additionally cut out from the anime, is that following the statement, and Rudeus going, oh, I guess I'll pray to it too for a harem and all that kind of stuff as a joke, Sauros says, I'm planning on heading out in a carriage. Would you care to join me? And Rudeus accepts it. And as they're walking out, Rudeus just decides, based on the fact that he's having his way with all these beast women, you know, what about your wife? Where is your wife? And Sauros grits his teeth and says, she's dead. And kind of unfortunately, to break the mood, Rudeus thinks to himself, man, this guy just shot off one and now I'm giving him bad memories. Like, I ruined this guy's day. Obviously, the two things in the scene to note is the fact that he's known this thing was there for 3 years, which for those that know later on the story, based on the anime adaptation alone, it's kind of significant. It kind of gives a little bit of credence to what happens later on. But additionally, the idea that, I don't know if it's going to be significant, but just kind of bringing up the fact of his wife and how she's dead may come into play sometime later, and I'm not sure if that's going to be the case. If you know, and as usual, don't tell me. But it does kind of give him a little more credit than just being this guy that has power that's sleeping with a bunch of beast women, thinking that he's just cheating on his wife. It pulls a little bit of that stain away from him, I guess. I mean, most of us, if we had a bunch of beast women as maids, we'd probably do the same thing, let's be honest. And again, she liked it. That's all I'm going to cover for now. That is chapters 3 through 5. Definitely some exciting stuff. I will say, I was hoping to get to it in this video, but the next part is super huge. When I opened up chapter 6 and they literally just say, here's the history of the entire world. I'm like, whoa. Okay, so I am definitely looking forward to recording that. I hope you guys will join me for that. Be excited for that. There's a lot of really cool information in there. If you're an anime-only fan, pretty much get your history lesson at that point. So I pretty much just going to read it off my off my tablet because it's that much stuff. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. As always, if you did, make sure to hit that like button down below. Comment, let me know what you thought of this whole segment. Is there anything in there that I brought up that's kind of interesting? If you're an anime-only fan, do you think the idea that Sauros knew that that object was there for 3 whole years kind of changes your thought process around the whole situation later on? I mean, it doesn't make it right. Let's be perfectly honest. I was a little bit troubled by that as well, but let me know. I'll be curious. Additionally, if you want to support us, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Share this video if you can. We have a Patreon link and a tips link in the description below. We also have a super thanks button from the YouTube, which you can go there and support us as well. Definitely appreciate everybody that supports us, and y'all take care.